Hey everybody, this is Other Side of Hurt podcast. In this podcast, we talk about some of the more difficult things in life. We interview people who are going through suffering and great tragedy, but we also try to find where there is hope and meaning and beauty, even in the most difficult things in life. So we're glad you're joining us today. We're going to try to drop one of these about once a week, at least for the time coming. And so please share these videos, like, subscribe. Thanks for joining us. We're going to dive right into today's topic. All right. So, hi, Kayla.
Hi.
So we are starting this podcast and so we're just diving in. My name's Tristan. My wife and I run Smile Again Grief Ministries here in central Minnesota. And we've got our really good friend Kayla here. And today she's just going to share some of her story with Paul, her husband, and what happened. So we're just going to dive right in. It's a couple of years since your kind of story really got started. So maybe tell me a little bit about where I don't know, where do you want to begin? Well, I'll just let you begin. Just dive in.
I feel like this is such a loaded
it's a loaded question.
Every time, how do you tell the story? But the kind of the way I feel like we've connected over the last, like, we've really appreciated your family in the midst of our suffering, being the birth of our son was really hard. And good, but hard. Yeah.
So you guys, just, I guess, to context, like, I was your pastor for a while, and now I'm not your pastor anymore. We're just friends. It's okay. But you were accepting. I remember. Maybe this will help you start.
Yeah.
I remember you were teaching Sunday school at our church, and it was December, and you guys were expecting your second child.
Yep.
And we had this conversation, and I think in hindsight, in Providence, I will remember this conversation for the rest of my life, of just like, you were so joyful, so excited. And you talked about, your baby was coming like right at Christmas.
Yeah.
And was it your mom who was born on Christmas?
Yep. That's so funny that's what you remember.
Yeah. I remember that.
Love that.
And it was just after, like, we were kind of like, I was closing up the church and we were talking, and I just remember you were super excited. I think it was probably like the last Sunday school before we shut down for Christmas break. And you started telling me about baby coming, and it'll be great because you'll have the time and Paul will be home. And it's just, your mom was born on Christmas. You're kind of hoping that your child was born on Christmas. And so I remember that conversation.
That's so fun. That's what you remember. That's awesome.
And everything was going good. There was
no complications, like normal pregnancy. I was like one of the weird people that like wanted my baby to be born on Christmas because I was extremely close with my grandma. And we named our first child after her. And I had this like vision of myself like reliving her life with my, like going into birth with my, or going into labor with my mom. So I was like kind of hoping it was on Christmas. But you know what? He ended up being born on my nephew's birthday, which was really special too.
Which is what day?
December 23rd.
23rd, so 2 days before Christmas.
So, but we actually were induced. We ended up getting induced, and then. Did
you know if you were having a boy or girl?
We did not know.
You didn't know anything.
We didn't know boy or girl.
Okay.
We knew everything was healthy, we thought everything was healthy, like no concerns on ultrasounds, like everything was totally typical. And I'm learning, like, very typical labor. There was nothing that, I mean, it felt long and it felt hard, but there was no, like, concerns while I was in labor.
So you and Paul are in the hospital.
We're in the hospital.
Everything's normal.
Everything's totally normal.
Excited for
we
baby number 2.
Excited. And then baby was born, and everything was also normal as baby was born. So we gave birth to Nolan on December 23rd of 2021. And immediately, like I told you, it was just a super long labor. I had been laboring for like over 2 hours. Not laboring.
I was like,
no,
I was like,
sorry.
2 hours. I mean, I'm a guy. I want to be careful here. I just, that doesn't sound long to me, but no, you were in active labor for 2 hours?
Was pushing for 2 hours. Thank you for clarifying. I was in labor for like, I had been induced like the night before, and then I gave birth to Nolan, I think like maybe at like 3 p.m. the next day. So
how long, sorry?
So I went in at like 6 p.m. the night before and was induced, and I started laboring right away. But then, so it took probably like, I mean, it was an induction, so it wasn't.
I was just thinking like you're going to alienate all women listening to this podcast right now by saying like it was really long. It was 2 hours. It was about, my first one was like 15 minutes. It was amazing.
It was so easy. No, I feel like that's dramatic in itself when it's that short. Sorry. But I pushed for 2 hours.
So, and then
so
Nolan's
I was
born,
physically tired.
Exhausted.
I was like way out of it. But no, I had a very normal, typical labor, but I was very out of it when he was born. And so I couldn't even really comprehend anything after he was born. So they set him on my chest. And I just remember hugging him, being like, I'm so happy you're here. I'm so tired. I'm so happy you're here. And he was big. He was 9 pounds, 6 ounces.
Goodness.
And I was big. I have never been, I was not that big with my first baby. So there's a lot of fluid. They set him on me. I probably try to kind of zone out, sleep for 30 to 45 minutes. And then finally the nurse comes in. She's like, okay, we need to try to get him to eat because his blood sugars were I think they were low. And so I, go to start trying to feed him. And so I'm a speech therapist by trade. So I'm used to looking at tongues and mouths. And I start to try to get him to latch. And I'm like, he has a clefted tongue. I've never heard of this. He has a clefted tongue. But I thought because I was still so out of it that I thought I was dreaming.
Sure.
And so anyways, long story short, that was kind of the first red flag, was something was wrong with his tongue. And then from there, it's all kind of a blur.
Yeah.
But basically, we had doctors coming in and out, looking at Nolan and looking at me and trying to figure out exactly what was going on. And he couldn't open his eyes. That was another thing we kind of learned in the first couple of hours. And of course we had family calling and how's everything going? And we weren't sure at that point.
Yeah.
The first 2 hours were again, it just felt like a dream. So it didn't feel like anything was really wrong yet. But then it was that evening when we couldn't get him to latch or consume anything. And babies don't really eat in the first 24 hours anyways.
Yeah.
They sleep, but the issue was that his blood sugars were dropping and they couldn't get him, to for his blood sugars to rise. So essentially we ended up being life flighted to a bigger city where they could help us.
Small hospital.
Yeah. And we had, it was kind of cool because we had probably 5 different doctors all involved in different parts. So we had Nolan's doctor, that was planning to see him in the hospital, come in and look at Nolan and talk with us. And then we had 3 of the doctors that had anything to do with my delivery, all come in and just check in on us and kind of how are you guys doing? But we knew that they were all there for something's going on.
Yeah.
And we've learned now, all of them suspected that there was a syndrome of some sort. But yeah, so essentially we went the whole first 12 hours just trying to get him to eat. We couldn't, so we got life flighted out. And we were told essentially we can't maintain his blood sugars. He needs to get somewhere where there's more help. And we suspect he has some sort of genetic syndrome. So we got to the NICU so I delivered him at 3 p.m. and then the next day at 11 a.m. we were driving down to the NICU, where we spent a couple of weeks just learning a lot of really hard news about Nolan. And just ended up having to put a feeding tube in and learned a lot of scary news about his kidneys and just had a lot of fear for what his future might look like. We learned that he has a missing epiglottis, which means the part of his swallow that helps protect his airway is missing or underdeveloped. And so we had a lot of fears that he would be in the hospital every month with a pneumonia because he couldn't keep saliva and all those sorts of things out of his airway. So just a really hard really fast, jolting awakening to being Nolan's parents.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of our journey. And then post being out of the NICU, you know, Nolan's been through a neurosurgery, and he's been through a lot of kidney procedures and all sorts of things. And so, yeah, that's kind of that. It's hard because now Nolan is 2 and we get to see so much joy in him, and like we get to experience like the good parts of him. So it's like strange to reflect on just like how hard those first 2 years really were. But it's taken us, I mean, like,
how did you and Paul hard. Like, so you're kind of like coming to this awareness over, you know, several hours and then over several days and then into the weeks. Like, how did you guys like process this? Like, what are some of the things you guys like talked about? Especially with all the uncertainty, because it just seemed like the news kept getting worse. How did you guys manage that? Or what can you tell me a little bit about what was happening then?
It was like that realization of, because for those 2 weeks in the NICU, we didn't know, 1, if we'd be bringing a baby home, or 2, if we would ever be like reunited as a family all together. We didn't know if Nolan's future, you know, consisted of him being in the hospital all the time and his healthy sister being at home and not being able to like be a family. And so that was a huge piece for us, was just the reality of like, our future is so unknown. We just really have no idea what this looks like. And so there was a lot of hard conversations about just what would it look like to have to endure that and be apart from each other for, you know, extended periods of time. And then just, you know, there's so many scary unknowns when you're in the medical world of like genetic findings and, just, I mean, every procedure is, especially in the NICU. I remember we had an amazing nurse and her name was Molly, and it was like around New Year's when we had been in there for like a week at that point, and she was like, you guys are going home. Like, she's just like, I will be the nurse tonight. You need to get out of here, because she was talking about how in the NICU, it's such a like out of body experience for people, because you're receiving so much information all of the time, because you need an MRI. The MRI is like pushed to you, or not necessarily an MRI, but like an echocardiogram or something. Like it's just pushed right to the NICU bed, and they can quickly do an echo, and then they're reading those results, and then a doctor is coming in and talking to you. And so it's like you're watching yourself learn about like all of this information.
I'm sure it's overwhelming. Like,
it's so overwhelming. And
like, just not knowing medical stuff. I mean, even to this day, I will talk about like our friends Paul and Kayla and Nolan, and I'm like, Nolan, I don't know how to he's just had all kinds of problems ever since he was born. I don't even know how to describe it, but like, I'm sure just like being his mom and his dad, just like, it's so overwhelming. Yeah.
And that's how most people, it's funny because people will connect us with other people and they're like, I don't really know what's wrong with their child, but like, you guys should meet. Yeah, it's a lot of like, it's so stuff. True. It's like only we can really like fully.
Well, and you don't, I mean, you don't even know fully.
No,
like there's still like don't. Not an answer for his conditions.
Yeah.
Because it does like seem like some sort of syndrome.
Yes.
But they've not been able to identify it, right? Is that correct?
Yes. Exactly. We don't have a genetic diagnosis or the best way we've had it described to us is that he is like a perfect storm of genetic changes that happened when he was born. No, the genetic team that we work with told us, you know, they're good at picking out one gene mutation that causes a lot of different things, but they're not as good at picking out like multiple genes that might cause something to go awry, you know?
And so like you talked about some, like he's had several eye surgeries. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
So I should maybe clarify
Yeah,
what's
like, I mean,
kind of the
'cause
status.
Nolan's still with us. He's grown.
Yes,
He's amazing.
He's doing so good. Yes.
But he's doing so good compared to like where he's been through and what he's been through. So let's maybe go back a little bit and talk about the last couple of years, like some of the things you've been through. Like he's had so many surgeries and so many things. I can't keep track, but like, give us some idea of
maybe
like,
that's part of the processing too, is, you know, he's come so far from where we thought, you know, and so to other people, they might see our family and think like, oh, he can't see very well, or, oh, but you know, we're like, he can track, like he can see some things, and he can, you know, he's just come so far in what we had envisioned for him.
It's amazing how much your perspective changes in suffering, in hard things, of like what you celebrate versus what all of us, I mean, like even being really good friends with you guys, like there's times I'm just like, oh man, you guys have been through so much. And like, not that I like pity you necessarily, but it's like, we love Nolan. We love your family. It's just hard. And yet you guys have come through so many things. And so maybe walk us through surgeries.
So, I think processing, like just in the sense of just gaining information about him and learning and just really kind of sitting in suffering and learning like hard news, and then allowing ourselves to just come to full terms with what that might look like, you know, and then being pleasantly surprised when maybe something turns out better. So where Nolan's at now is we have like established a super amazing care team at Mayo. And so we go down there, you know, every 6 months or so, and they look at his kidneys, and we follow an ENT team there that is following his tongue and his epiglottis and determining when and if we need to, you know, have a surgery on that. That surgery would be very scary because that would involve, you know, needing to be trached for a period of time. And so that's kind of the surgery that's looming. That would be really scary to do. Yeah. But if the second he starts showing, you know, pulmonary disease of any sort, that's something that will have to go down that track. But so they're monitoring, you know, his tongue and his epiglottis, and they're monitoring his kidneys, which again, at the beginning, those were the two things that were the scariest because we didn't know. He basically has a non-functioning kidney and then one kidney that is poorly, it's just not a typical kidney. It's formed just a little bit differently, but it's functioning. Yeah. And so initially, you know, we were told, well, we need to remove the kidney and we need to, his bladder wasn't working the way that the urologist thought that it should work. And so we were told all these scary things about surgeries we'd have to do and how we'd have to straight cath him every single day for 6 times a day and all this really hard news. Same with his epiglottis. Like we were told he's going to have lung disease and we're going to have to figure out how to, you know, support this. And so the gist of that is those were kind of the two scariest. And then his brain surgery was scary. I was going to say,
I was like, like you almost just glossed over that. Yes. I'm like, the one thing, like I only remember like bits and pieces, but I'm like, they had to put a stent in his brain to drain fluid.
Shunt. Yes. Or shunt. Yep. And that ended up being the hardest month of our life was when he had to have his shunt because...
That was like, how old was he?
He was 6 months.
I was going to say his first year, right?
Yeah, 6 months. And that ended up being the hardest month of our life because that was when so I worked full-time as a speech therapist. I was planning to go back to work full-time. And in that month of his neurosurgery, he had a shunt placed and then he...
Because he's having fluid build up on his brain.
Oh, right? Yeah. And that was the month, like, so we lost power at our house, like the days leading up to this surgery. So we were... Like I had so much laundry to do, just minor things, right? But like I had so much laundry to do. We finally just like packed up. We had to drive to my parents so that Nora could stay with my parents while we went to neurosurgery and hit a deer on the way to my parents' house. And then we made it to neurosurgery. Nolan, we've learned, handled it super well, but the first 48 hours after his neurosurgery were extremely hard. He was throwing up. We couldn't get him to stop throwing up. now we're learning, probably because his brain had all this fluid on it and he was just learning,
adjusting to the
new normal.
Boy, man.
And so, and then that was in the same time that we met with a urologist, and the urologist discovered that his bladder wasn't emptying fully. So she had recommended we start straight cathing 6 times a day. And
Jeez.
so then I, in that same month, like I quit my job because I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to like have somebody else straight cath him. And he wasn't responding, so it was just all these really hard things that month. Now looking back, that was the best month that could have happened to us, because
except for the deer.
I
feel like the deer is like God really, like, come on.
It was like, it was because so we had lost power, and I was like packing up in the dark, and Paul walked in the door. My husband's name is Paul, walked in the door, and I'm getting ready to go pack up our son for neurosurgery. And Paul walks in the door, and I'm just bawling. And he's like, at this point, it's like, we've seen each other bawling so much, but it's just like, he walks in, he's just like, okay, it's, it's hard. And I'm like, really, God? Like, what else? Like, really, right now, this month, like, you're going to add all this. And then we hit the deer on our way home. And then I just remember sitting in the car waiting for my parents. And I'm just, okay, there can always be more, right? Like, this is my reminder of like, there's always more to be had. So yeah, but then from that, it allowed me to realize I can be home with him. And we received PCA hours for having to straight cath. So there's all these things that just kind of fell into place for us, so that long term, and then his neurosurgery ended up being one of the best things developmentally for him. I mean, he started lifting his head, and he started looking around and doing so many things he wasn't doing before that surgery. So it was the hardest month of our life, but it was really cool. So now we just kind of follow everybody mostly every 6 months. Nolan remains out of the hospital, and his lungs remain clear, which is a huge answered prayer. And then his kidneys have been stable. We haven't had to remove a kidney. And his blood work is like our nephrologist last time we were there, he said, if I didn't see what his kidneys looked like, I would have no idea he's a kid with kidney issues, because his blood work has just always been stable. So we're so thankful for that.
Yeah, it's for me, it's always striking, like thinking about you're having a normal delivery, everything's going smooth, and like how things start to like slowly change for you guys to even like, I mean, I think we've talked about this, like you just didn't know if he was going to live, right? I mean, there was like a lot of fears about like that initially. And then, I mean, now he's crawling, he's
pulling to stand and walking along stuff.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he was on a feeding tube for quite a while, but he still
is, but he just we just learned that he can start eating by mouth, which is something we never thought would happen for him. So, I mean, it's still always risky, and we could be told at any minute, things are going south, but it's true though, because I remember, so we were separated from our daughter, who's 4 when he was, and at the time she was 2 when he was born. And so we were separated from her for 2 weeks, which doesn't feel like a lot, but when you're used to being together every day, 2 weeks feels like an eternity.
And
even
for a
just
2-year-old,
and then it's just, Paul and I were so, it's like you're picked up. I remember we talked about like, have you ever been somewhere where one day your life looks this way, and then the next day you wake up and it's just completely different?
Yeah.
And that was us. It was, here we were anticipating like celebrating Christmas with our family and coming home. And I remember being overwhelmed with the idea of hosting people. And that's like, I would give anything right now to just be hosting people. But we were sitting in our hotel room and, just kind of looking at each other like, how did we get here? You know, I mean, it's just, you're not really processing it. I don't think for at least for us, like we were surviving, and we were like, we were being good parents, but we were not really, we were not really taking things in as much, I don't think, until, the months after.
Yeah.
And Nolan didn't really honestly feel like I remember because so Nora was our first, and obviously she's a girl, and they kept referring to Nolan as a he. And he's a male. And it's like, but it felt so foreign to me because he didn't feel like my baby yet. And so it felt, because he's in a warmer, and you don't really get to hold him very much. And
he's got all these things that they're working on. And
and it was like, it didn't sink in, like, this is my son. I have a son. Like, I get to take a son home, because I didn't know. It just felt like, it felt so different, than what we had anticipated. So,
and Nolan just turned 2 last month.
Yes.
A couple of things I remember, just around Christmas with him being born, because it was the day after he was born, Christmas Eve. We were getting, I love Christmas time. I'm a sucker for all things Christmas. And we were doing Christmas Eve service at Riverview. And I'm very good friends with Kayla's uncle, who was our worship leader at a church. And he came up and he just let me know. He's like, there's some problems with, like, Paul and Kayla had their baby, but there's some problem. And just like feeling that, like, the weight, like some sort of something, but even like nobody really knew at that time. And just feeling that weight of, like, remembering our conversation from a couple weeks before, and you're super excited and everything's going well, to like, oh, it's Christmas and everybody's celebrating, and Paul and Kayla were life flighted down, or the baby was life flighted down, and they're in the hospital, and just feeling that, like, oh man. And then another memory though, like, so walking with you guys for that year, and just like and being in the hospital with you a couple of times, and just like those conversations, and just our hearts aching with you guys. But then the video you sent us like Christmas the next year of like the progress of Nolan. Like, I was sitting here with Jill, like, crying my eyes out watching the video, because like, just walking with you through, like, all of this suffering and sorrow and fear, and is Nolan going to live? Is he not? And what's it mean? And what are we going to have to do? And like, the cathing him 6 times a day. I remember that conversation of like,
you were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I was when you were like, was super heavy, because we were children's, I think. And it was in that time frame anyway. You were talking about that. And just remember, like, the weight of that.
Yeah, I remember you being there. And I remember, and that was what prompted us to get a second opinion from urology, was essentially, we were told by the nursing staff, oh, and you're going to start straight cathing him 6 times a day. And then I remember you showed up. And I remember, like, being so appreciative, because at that time, we felt so just exhausted and drained and had no energy. And I just remember you came in and you were just there. You didn't sit and, like, read a scripture to us and tell us, like, things were going to be okay. 'Cause at the time we just had
just overwhelmed,
no energy. And, and it felt really, really hard at that time. But,
well, I mean, and you guys carry yourself really well, and like, we've become good friends, and I'm excited about this podcast together, just because it's fun to talk with you, and you're a good friend. But I think, like, you guys handle yourself well, but, like, just thinking through all the things you've just talked about, like, and for all of us, like, listening in, it's just, I don't even know where you begin. It's overwhelming.
It is. I don't know how to describe Nolan to people. And even now, I don't even think we fully, like, so the other thing, Nolan, is that he is visually impaired, and so and he has hearing loss. So
you glossed over brain surgery earlier, just so you know, like, you're like, oh yeah, there was the brain surgery, and like, like,
and it's funny because when we go to hospitals, I mean, now our teams know us well, but if we're ever, like, somewhere for an ICC stay, or we're not an ICC anymore, but like a PICU stay or something, or if we're in for a surgery, our team will, like the nurse will read his chart, Nolan's chart, and then they'll come in and they'll be like, oh my gosh, he's just a baby. And you're like, yeah, he's just a normal little guy, but he's got all these things that are going on with him. And you kind of forget. But the biggest thing now is his eyes. We really follow closely with ophthalmology and oculoplastic surgery. So yeah, but anyways,
No. How, this is this is a terrible question. How's this changed you? Like, as you think about you and Paul and who you were on December 22nd of 2022 and who you are today?
Yeah.
This is a huge question.
No, I mean, yeah. And I feel like this is a conversation we just continue to have all
Yeah.
the time, you and I together. But in every way, I mean, fully learning and understanding and like choosing to trust in God's provision, even in hardship, has been, I think, I would say the kind of the summary, I would say, of our life. It's just, we see hardship, we see suffering in other people so much more than we did before. And
doesn't it change just how you see the world? Like, I mean, that's something for us fundamentally, like, like you're so much more aware, right, of other things that you would have not been aware of.
It's the other
before.
side of hurt.
Yeah.
Like what we've talked about. I mean, it's realizing, you know, I think especially in Christian culture, we can get into this mindset of, I'm so blessed, right? Like I have
Don't
5 healthy children. Yes.
Yeah.
Like I have 5 healthy children and like we're all so blessed. And it's true. Like there's goodness, right?
Absolutely.
There's goodness in healthy children.
Yeah.
But it's like when you actually dig into God's word and read through like Paul in 2 Corinthians, where he's like, this thorn inside of me is actually like, is actually what's good, you know, and kind of coming through on the other side of it.
It's not good. And it's like, I think this is something like that I think we should talk more about is there's like the suffering is not good.
Yes. Good clarification.
But there is like goodness that comes out of it. It changes you. It is used like God, like
a humility that is better than if you were just trying to like.
Yeah. Cause let's talk about this. Cause you and I've talked, and I think this is something we should talk about regarding Nolan that I think is maybe a hard conversation, but I think it's helpful, which is you don't want all these problems.
No,
like if you could snap your fingers, it would be like, if I could make him see and take care of his tongue, and I forget all the medical stuff. It's like so much,
whatever.
But like you could take away all these problems. You do it in a heartbeat because you love him. But you love him in spite of those things, and you love him in the midst of those things. Like he's like
and
special in a certain way because of his suffering. I don't know. Tell me about that.
Yeah. And so when he was first, if you would have asked me in the NICU or the ICC after his neurosurgery, I would have said, yes, I would take his suffering away now. Right. But now it's like that suffering in itself is what makes Nolan who he is, kind of in a strange way. And it feels sometimes inhumane to say that. Like I don't wish suffering upon anybody, but at the same time, his visual impairment, yes, it would be so much more functional for him to be able to see and to be able to explore his world. But the way he explores his world is so uniquely Nolan that it's
interesting.
It's hard to even, I don't know now if I would snap my fingers. That question is so hard to answer because, but I'll be curious as Nolan gets older and if he's able to communicate with us, like, would you want to see? Would you want to not have to go to the hospital?
Yeah.
Because even in the midst of those things, it's not in the midst of it. In the midst of it, I would take it away in a heartbeat, but it's because of it. I think he's just the toughest little guy, and he's so cute, and when he feels good he is so happy, and he's just so it's interesting.
It's tough because you obviously don't want him to suffer, but you love him in the suffering, and there's something about that like that it changes us, right? And it changes even the nature of our love. It's not, I do think like people have a hard time with these things because what do you?
Yes,
they don't know.
I do.
Yeah, they don't know how to enter in. I think just even in our situation, like losing a daughter, people don't know what to say or how to deal with it. And in some ways, like, man, we still love Maria. Like we love her, and it's horrible, and we lost her, and it's hard to love in brokenness. Yeah. But part of the brokenness, like, is so tied into your love and your connection to your child or whoever it is that's going through the thing. I don't know. It's a very mysterious kind of thing that we carry when we carry our crosses. And
it's interesting though, because you've said before, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you could take it back, you would want Maria here.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yes.
But I think I've said
but
this.
But maybe that's grief.
I've said this. I've said, one of the things we've talked about, and I've heard other people say this is not unique to us, but if I could compare two worlds, so let's say in this world, we've had a daughter and lost her, and we have our other children, and we're a happy family, but we have like a big hole in our life, and we have a lot of sorrow, and we suffered greatly. So like that's life number one, the life that is. And life number two would be the world where everything else is the same, but we just never had Maria. So like, let's just say, imagine she was never born, and we had all of our other kids.
You never knew what life was like. Yeah,
and I never knew her, and I never like lost her, and it would be a far easier world, like far easier to not have to go through losing her. And the real world in which we live, where with like the shock of her death and the suffering was horrific, and it was the worst season of our life, and it upended everything. But if I could get rid of all that and have a much easier life, I would choose the real life. Like, because in the real life, like she was here and we loved her and like we still love her and we miss her and we grieve her loss. But I would take that over the like not existing kind of thing. Right. Like,
and you've also said, which I really like this part of but if you could choose, like if you were 15 and you were looking future of your life and you hadn't known Maria though, like you might have chosen the one in which she didn't exist.
Oh yeah,
it felt easier.
Because then like in like if I was 15 or I don't know 20,
yes,
thinking
right.
15 I was too immature to even think about these things. But at 20, like I would have thought like no, I don't want to have a life where I lose a child. And I'm sure like for you, like even ahead of time, like would I choose to have like all of these things? That's overwhelming. But then but it's like, it's Nolan. Like,
but
he's
now
loved.
I can't imagine not. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can't imagine not.
And yet you still like, I mean, in this same way, you still are hoping for the goodness of him in any way possible. So if he can have sight, praise God. Like if he can,
every time we go to Mayo and we have a kidney ultrasound, am I like, oh, I hope this doesn't go well. So now we have to endure like dialysis.
Enough suffering, God. I'm good.
Like I'm always like,
yeah.
But do I trust now that if that happens, it's the reality of like, there will be really dark days, but it doesn't mean like those dark days don't come with joy after them. Because I think I remember my mother-in-law saying to me, and it meant a lot when we were in the middle of just life with Nolan, and the first year was so hard. And I remember she looked at me and she goes, "You'll find joy again. You will."
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't actually really think I would. I thought my life was forever sad. You know, I thought I was just going to be a medically complex mom that had to watch all of these other kids experience joy, and my kid would just be, you know, we'd be separated as a family and we'd be suffering. And so it took somebody telling me like, "You'll find joy again." And it's true. Even in our hardest days, it was like, we just went to bed. And we woke up, and maybe not that day we found joy, but somewhere along the line, you know, we found joy again. So, yeah.
I don't know if I would have received that from your mother-in-law.
See, and that's funny because somebody else told me the same thing. They're like, "That sounds terrible."
Well, but it is true.
Yeah.
It is true, but it's also like really hard to experience in that moment. I mean, I think, and again, not like we have a lot of parallels in our story, but there's also a lot of differences, right? Like the major differences, but like this is one of the reasons like we feel really close with you guys, because we've walked through similar things, and you guys are joyful. Like you are not like these miserable people to be around, like because of your suffering. And I hope I'm not.
No,
I was for a while, but when people would tell me like you'll find joy again, I was almost like, yeah, maybe, but like it's not helpful.
But not right now.
That's not helpful. Like it just doesn't help me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like maybe that's just a different experience or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how to receive that, but
it's so true. Everybody receives it differently, because for me it was, I needed somebody to tell me this won't last forever. Your feelings will not be.
Yeah.
I think I also grew up in a family where it was, and I think this is most of America maybe, but where it was not a good thing to feel sad. It was not a good thing to feel like needing something or wanting something. Like we were very much like comfortable, right? It was good to be comfortable. It was good to be happy and for things to go well. And when things went wrong, we wanted, you know, answers as to how to solve them. And really most of my life there wasn't a lot of suffering, you know. I still have my parents and my siblings, and my grandparents lived to be, you know, elderly. And so I think, where was I going with this?
You were living in a positive reality, and now so, you're in this like shattered suffering, sorrow. Yes. So you need somebody to remind you.
Yes. And I remember that's another way I've changed, I think, with Nolan is, just kind of acknowledging that sadness and suffering, it's not fun, but it's temporary. And that is helpful for me because, I remember you and I talking about a story too of being around another person that had lost a child before Maria had died. And you told the story of her crying in front of you and you saying, "Oh, we don't have to talk. Like, I don't want you to cry." And she just kind of said, "This is just who I am now. You know, I cry." Yeah. And I feel that so deeply now. I can cry and it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, it's just an emotion, you know, just a feeling. But
yeah, I think we're very opposite on this one because I'm more like, everything's falling apart. If it's good, don't get your hopes up too much, Kayla, because it's all going to come crashing down.
But no. I'm that way too, though. That's, I guess, and that's maybe what because even in the highs, I'm like, this is temporary. It's just more of, it helped me in the lows to remember this will end. I will not feel so sad forever. It will feel different in a little bit. But yeah, maybe you're more like, I'm gonna just soak in this.
I'm like, today's a good day, but it's gonna get worse. It's all gonna fall apart. No. I mean, I don't know. Different situations, different scenarios, and I think like that's one of our goals. I think in this podcast is I'm like, I think you want to talk about both, right? You want to talk about like, not this like Christianese like, well, you know, you had a son and he's still with you and everything's good. Like you gloss over like all of the horrible things and the difficult things and the sadness and the and the suffering and the difficulties. But nor are you just like bleak and hopeless. And it's like, but Nolan is loved and he's here. And even for me, it's like, yeah, we lost Maria. It's horribly sad. And we can talk about like the worst of these things. But like she was beautiful. We loved her. And we've got a happy family in many ways. And it's like reality is both like the worst of things and joy. It is both like tragedy and
I think that's
joy.
How you look at suffering differently too. When you've been through suffering is you realize we're all exactly what you said, one day away from just the low of the lows, or we're one day away from the highs of the highs. So it's, you know, it's like pre-Nolan, I was probably one of the people that it's like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Oh my gosh. Can you believe that happened to their family? You know? And now I'm like, oh, like it just,
you're just aware.
It just feels heavy for me when I hear hard news. Cause I know that everything is like, we're all 1 second away from hardship, you know?
You feel it more, but the other thing, I'm like just more in tune with it and like, I'm not afraid of it as much anymore.
Yeah.
Like even for you guys, it was like, we want to just be with you. Like we don't know what's coming, but like whatever we can do, if it's helpful, we'll just walk with you in the misery and the joy and whatever.
And it looks different sometimes than you think it will on the other side. And you just want to be with people because it's like, oh my gosh, is that, because there were times where it's like, what does our life look like to people on the outside? Are people, do they feel sorry for us or do they feel like we're extremely dramatic right now with, you know, like the birth of our son, you know what I mean? But I think that's what you do when you're sometimes in the midst of suffering is sometimes it feels heavy. Yes. But sometimes it feels like, it feels like you don't want to like draw too much attention to yourself. And it feels different sometimes when you're sitting with people and you think, oh, they must feel this way. And no, sometimes you don't feel that way when you're in like on the other side of going through something.
Yeah. Well, and I guess from my perspective, you guys, like, you always carried yourself well in that we could be honest and talk about difficult things. Like, who cares what people think in one way, right? Like,
totally.
Like, who cares? But yeah, I mean, I think when you've not gone through suffering or you're not attuned, I'm not sure everybody has to go through suffering in order to learn these things. But I think when you haven't gone through it, people are fearful of how to engage. Mm-hmm. So here's Paul and Kayla in the hospital. They've got really bad news. And most people are just like, I don't even know how to enter into that. I don't even know what to say. Yeah. Because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And for me, I'm just like, well, whatever we can do, let's engage. Let's have a conversation. Let's come visit you or something like that.
So true.
Yeah. And I think that's like, even our conversations in this podcast is like, let's talk about the hardest things. And as we bring people on, like, let's talk about the hardest things, but there's also joy in the middle of it. It's not either or. It's not like you get through the suffering and then you're happy again, but it's like, it's all muddled together. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So this has been good. I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to share?
No, this is fun.
Try some more in a little bit, but no, thanks for coming on. And I think our goal is to like work on this together, mm-hmm. play with it together, see what happens. But it's fun. It's fun chatting with you. It's fun here. It's interesting for me just to hear the story that I've been kind of walking with, but like, we're not in it at that mm-hmm. level, right? Mm-hmm. We get bits and pieces and we connect, and but to hear kind of the whole 2-year progression and yeah, it continues. Yeah. Like, it continues on, doesn't it? So.
And it's fun for me. I've never like sat down and chronologically told the stories. Hence why, it's hard to fully start at the beginning and go through it all. But,
I do feel like you failed though, because you haven't made me cry yet.
I know. We need to cry and laugh.
I cry so easily now, and so like, I think that's an epic failure on your part.
I know.
We gotta go redo all of this, and so you gotta like say some things and to where I'm weeping. So.
I know. I feel like we've wept together enough in other circumstances we'll just call it fair for this podcast episode.
All right, cool. Hey everybody, thanks for making it all the way to the end of our podcast. Please share and like and subscribe to be a part of the Other Side of Hurt community. Also, if you are somebody who has recently suffered the loss of a child, or if you know of a family, we are going to link to our website, Smile Again Grief Ministries, below, and we would love to connect with you to see if there's anything we can do as we walk together in some of the most difficult things that families go through. God bless you.